Hello and welcome to Fact or Fiction on Sportuccino. I'm Richard Parr, and every single Monday at 11 British Standard Time, we discuss the biggest stories in sport. I give statements relating to what's happened over the weekend or what's going to happen in the future to my guest, and we decide whether they are fact or fiction. And I get some of the best guests in the sports industry to answer them, from commentators to journalists to ex-professionals. They're all on fact or fiction on Sportuccino. And of course, we are live on Facebook, on YouTube, on Periscope, and of course at Sportuccino.com. So if you've got any comments, if you've got any strong opinions, we would love to hear from you about them. Just send us your message in the comment section and we'll try and read as many as we can throughout the program. And of course, if you miss any of this program, you can go back and watch those episodes on all of those formats, but also you can listen to it as a podcast on iTunes and on Stitcher. I think actually listening to it is my favourite form, because then I don't have to look at myself. But never mind, you decide how you want to consume your content. And I've got a great guest on today's programme. I'm delighted to say that joining me to do fact or fiction is the European football commentator, Seb Hutchinson. Seb, welcome to the programme. How was your weekend?
I had a good weekend, Richard. Plenty of football, bit of rugby as well.
Oh, nice stuff, nice stuff. Did you happen to watch England on Friday against Malta?
Yes.
What did you
I'll just
make
leave
of
it
it?
at that. Well, I've heard a lot of people. I try not to ever miss an England game if I can, and that includes under 21s as well. I think what a lot of people have said about England is the fact that they lack creativity in midfield, and I think that was pretty clear on Friday, really.
Yeah, a team with Jake Livermore, for me, doesn't sound like a World Cup winning team, with all of the greatest respect to Jake. But I think we can go into this in a little bit more detail. Let's, of course, do our first statement in today's fact or fiction. We are asking, well, we're saying, England will reach the World Cup unbeaten in qualifying. Fact or fiction, Seb?
Well, fact, clearly. I don't think that's the problem for England. I think their group is definitely a group they should be going through unbeaten. I know Slovakia have proved to be tricky for England in recent times, but then saying that they haven't scored against England in the last two matches themselves. So England should have been looking at that group and thinking, we'll go through it unbeaten. I know the Scotland games are big, but we should go through the group unbeaten. And they came so close to losing, of course, in Scotland. But from now, they've got Slovakia tonight, and that, on paper, looked to be the toughest game in the group. No disrespect to Scottish fans, apologies. And then, of course, they've got Lithuania and Slovenia to come. So you would think they'd get through the group unscathed. But that's happened in the past. And, of course, the real test comes next summer in Russia. And they should get there. They should get there. Tonight will, of course, go a long way to confirming that. But the real test is in Russia, really.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there, Seb. I'm going to say fact as well. You know, under Roy Hodgson, it was never really a problem of England qualifying. And I believe one of the tournaments, maybe the last tournament, they did it unbeaten. And they just got found out, you know, losing to Iceland, utterly embarrassing. They've got 3 more games to go, including Slovakia tonight. And then they've also got Slovenia at home and they've got Lithuania away. They beat Slovakia 1-0. In their opening game of this, which, as we may remember, was Sam Allardyce's one and only game in charge. It's amazing what happens through his career in life already. He's been manager of Palace and left in that time. But, yeah, there was a close one there. They only got a 0-0 draw away at Slovenia. So I don't think, and on the basis of the performance against Malta, I don't think it's going to be 3 wins. I don't see 9 points, but potentially 7, potentially even 5, and I think either way that will be enough to go through that group. Let's talk a little bit more in detail then about the England team. We spoke a bit about Livermore there, Seb. What about the goalkeeping position? A bit of comments from the panel, in fact, on ITV, the host broadcasters here in the UK, about Joe Hart being in goal. So that does leave us to our next question on the fact or fiction, and we are asking about Joe Hart. It says, Joe Hart should stay as England's number 1, fact or fiction?
Well, I'm going to say fact, but more for the time being. I would say he's played all the qualifiers pretty much, and if you're going into a World Cup cycle, you need to keep the team consistent, really. I believe, especially with your goalkeeper. We'll see how the World Cup goes as far as Joe's concerned, but I think he deserves just one more tournament. He's played the qualifiers. Let him see the tournament out. If he has an excellent competition, if England have an excellent competition, he stays. He's not that old in goalkeeping terms anyway, so we shouldn't be getting him to retire so quickly, really. There are some talented young goalkeepers in England, but I feel throwing them in now with only a couple of qualifiers left and some friendlies and then going into the tournament, we're asking for trouble. I remember, I think for Euro 2008, we were chopping and changing goalkeepers and it didn't turn out very well and we ended up not qualifying. So while I don't feel that would be the case if we chopped and changed this time round, I just feel that Joe deserves the chance, really. I feel he was criticised a lot last season at Torino, but I commentated on a lot of Torino games, and to be fair to him, his defence didn't help him out at all by any stretch of the imagination, and he made some very good saves, but of course they highlight the mistakes, and that's what a goalkeeper's judged on. But I think Joe deserves the chance. He's been a good servant for England, and to be fair to him, he's battered away competition in recent years. He's got some good competition now in Butland and Pickford, but I think he deserves a chance to stay in the team for now.
Who do you think would be the long-term successor for Hart, Seb?
It's so difficult to say because it all depends on injuries, and some of our goalkeepers have picked up some bad ones recently. So I like Fraser Forster, but I think if you're looking long-term, you want to say, which is what happened with Hart, going back in time, is that you pick a Pickford and you pick a Butland and you go with them. I think with Jack, it's going to come down to injuries, really, and whether he can have a run of games. If he does, I really rate him as a goalkeeper. And I think Jordan Pickford's got a little bit of goalkeeping X factor, in my opinion. But I always say it with goalkeepers. They can look great in doing everything, but it's all down to whether they keep the ball out the net when they should keep it out the net. And that's what they get judged on half the time. So mistakes flare up and it can ruin them, really.
They do indeed. And of course, everyone's got an opinion on this, Seb. I'm actually going to say fiction, mainly because of some of the things we've both spoken about already today. The fact that, as you mentioned, you think they're going to qualify, and that's not really the focus. It should be the main tournament. For me, also, the matches, which I think they've got coming up, I don't think it matters who would go in goal for these three games. And so part of me thinks, give some of these other guys a chance, that you kind of know what Joe Hart can do, and perhaps we can see how some of these players affect with the pressure playing with England. Because I think for me, a few of the problems for Joe Hart, particularly last year at the Euros, was a bit of the pressure. You saw that game against Iceland where he was really pumping himself up and getting ready for it. And I think it's worth having a change. As far as who is the successor, I particularly like Butland. Still not convinced personally by Pickford. Big fan of Forster. Not certainly convinced either with Heaton. But you know what? All being said and done, I think it's a nice option for Southgate to have. And you know, in some ways, I do credit what he said before the game against Malta. He said, Joe's done nothing wrong for me since I've taken over, so I've got no reason to get rid of him. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. All right, let's move on. We're going to talk transfers. Of course, the transfer window, in the way that it said on TV, it slams shut at 11 on Thursday. It doesn't close, it slams. No Big Ben because it's being refurbished, it's being fixed, but it was slammed shut. And so we're going to talk about who had the worst window. And our statement is Arsenal had the worst transfer window in the Premier League. Fact or fiction?
I'm going to say fact.
Oh,
yeah. Simply because on paper, I would say a club like Newcastle had a pretty disappointing transfer window. But I think you've got to judge transfer windows based on fan expectation. Now, everybody follows their club and wants their club to do well and wants them to sign the best players. But I think with Arsenal fans, it's a unique scenario because Wenger's been there so long and they've seen the same thing time after time. All the talk this summer was there's money to spend. And before the season ticket renewal date happened, they were talking big about how we're going to sign lots of players, we're going to spend some money and really have a go at it. And then by the end of the transfer window, they're talking about not having enough money, having to sell players, the squad's too big, the wage bill's too high. And I think if you look at it overall, I think Lacazette is an excellent striker. I think Kolasinac is a very good signing as well, an astute one. But in many ways, Arsenal's problem was the fact that a lot of players wanted to leave the club in the summer, which is a statement in itself. And if you look back to, say, Manchester United when they didn't qualify for the Champions League, they didn't really spend time trying to bat away players wanting to leave the club. They went out and made a statement and bought players. Now, I know Arsenal will say Man United are on a financial level above them, but still, the talk was there and they didn't follow through, which disappointed fans, which meant that for me, they definitely underperformed in the transfer window. They've certainly got players good enough to finish in the top four, not to win the title, I don't think at all, but definitely to finish in the top four. And that looks like it's going to be their target again. And in fact, they're probably in a weaker position than they were even a couple of years ago. So I think I definitely agree that Arsenal have had possibly the worst transfer window in the Premier League.
Okay, I'm going to give my reply to that in just a moment. While we're talking Arsenal, I just want to get your thoughts a little bit more on them. What are your thoughts on them playing this back three at the moment?
Well, when they first did it, they had some success with it, and it seemed an obvious decision for them to go to a back three to protect that defence, because it's definitely the weakest area for Arsenal. However, what happened is they don't look as if they've looked to sign players to play in that back three. If anything, they've lost Gabriel. They had an injury to Koscielny. Mustafi's not been the player they hoped he would be, and the club have said that. So it doesn't look like they've said that's our area where we're going to have a back three. Let's go and invest in players in that back three and strengthen it. Instead, they're playing left backs there and younger players. So they were asking for trouble in a defensive point of view. And then they don't have that screen in front of the back three either. And then they're having to play, when they were trying to appease Chamberlain, I guess, he was in the side. You've got a right back playing left back. You've got somebody who wants to play centre midfield playing right wing back. People are out of position, and it doesn't look like it's working. And I've got a feeling that they're going to go back to the back four again, especially more down to personnel, really. I just don't think they have the personnel to play that system. It was working for them in an attacking sense, and they're keeping the ball a lot, but defensively they look pretty vulnerable.
Yeah, I think they might change it soon. All right, I'll give my response to Arsenal having the worst transfer window in the Premier League. And I'm going to say fiction, mainly because I think the business they did was excellent in Lacazette. Kolasinac looks a really good player. And I think crucially, they kept Alexis Sanchez, even possibly against his own wishes. The fact that he's still at the club for another year, I think it is quite a good result for Arsenal. I was looking down the list before we went on the air of some of the business of the other teams, and I think that there's three in particular you could say which were probably worse than Arsenal. Brighton, the fact they didn't sign a striker, they look weak up top. Palace, they didn't get a keeper, they didn't get any backup for Benteke. They did get Sacco towards the end, I think that's a good signing, but I think it wasn't the greatest window for them, and they haven't started well under Frank de Boer. And then I've also got Newcastle down, and they signed a few players. I think getting rid of Dwight Gale is a bad decision. I'm not sure Josuelu is a better option. They signed Lejeune, the defender. He could be a good signing, but if I was a Newcastle fan, I wouldn't be particularly excited by any of them. And I might be a little bit controversial here, Seb. I think in some ways, Spurs had a worse transfer window than Arsenal because they lost their best right back. I heard a lot of chat from Spurs fans saying they won't replace Walker because Trippier's the man, Trippier's a better crosser. And in the end, they ended up buying Serge Aurier, who's got his own disciplinary problems himself. I don't think that's really been reported too much since he's moved. They've signed two defenders in Foyth and Sanchez. And yet they have, in my opinion, the best centre-back pairing in the league in Alderweireld and Vertonghen. So where are these two going to play? Yes, they could play a back three, but £42 million for what could be a backup central defender. I'm not so sure about that. Spurs' problems possibly in the last few years is they haven't strengthened the first team. They've always been trying to strengthen the bench. I think they've done that again with Llorente. They've kept hold of Janssen, which I think they should have tried to get rid of him. I don't think it's a particularly good window for me. So that's why I'm going to say fiction.
Can I just make one point though about Tottenham?
Yeah, get in
because
there.
I think the problem that they have, which is a problem maybe Arsenal have had and Liverpool have had and probably still do have, is that Tottenham's first 11 is very good. And to improve on that, they'd have to spend big. And I'm talking about players who would be coveted by Barcelona and Real Madrid. And they're not going to get those players. So after that, you could say they could back up their bench and put some strength and depth on their bench. And I feel that Spurs have done that. They put a striker in Llorente, who's an experienced goal scorer, who will be on the bench behind Kane. And that was the problem. Could they sign a striker who'd play second fiddle to him? And then in defence, they brought a young, hungry centre-half who will keep the established pair on their toes. And if they do have a problem in that area, he will be able to slot straight in and they won't have a problem at all. And then Serge Aurier, Trippier would have been fine at right back. And he is a gamble in many sense. But if it pays off, they've got a very good right back there and one who potentially could make even more of an impact than Walker did. So for Spurs, I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt that their problem is more that they won't be able to sign those players. So I don't think they let anybody down. Whereas I think Arsenal definitely room for improvement in that starting 11. Brighton, though, I will agree with you, but it's difficult for them. They've just been newly promoted, and I suppose their only difficulty is that Huddersfield did pretty well in that area, so that's their comparison. But Newcastle didn't.
No, Newcastle didn't at all. And with hindsight to Brighton, they have strengthened, they have broken their transfer record 3 times this summer. But I think, as I mentioned, I think on last week's show, I felt that they really needed a striker. So that's why I don't think it's quite as bad. It's not as good as Arsenal, for example. Anyway, let's move on. We're talking about strikers, and one of the most lethal strikers in the Premier League, certainly last year, certainly the season before last year, not the second season under Mourinho, because it all went a bit messy for him there. It is, of course, Diego Costa, the man who gets fired by Tex and is now wanted back at Chelsea. So we are asking, Diego Costa will play for Chelsea again this season. Fact or fiction?
Fact. And there's one simple reason why I think he'll play again, is that the World Cup's next year, and any player wants to be involved in that. Even if they don't want to stay. This is the one silver lining about Coutinho and Sanchez, and even players like Ozil, is that they won't let their level drop because they know that they're under pressure. Now, I know Sanchez will probably play for Chile, whatever happens if they get to the World Cup, but you know, you want to stay professional and you want to show your top level and prove that you are good enough, and then to be able to get the chance to shine at that tournament. So I think Costa, when the dust settles, he'll want to get back in the fold. I suppose the problem will be whether Conte wants to put him in the 11 again or involve him. But I would have thought with all the competitions Chelsea now have to play this season that they didn't have, they didn't have the Champions League last season, that big squad is going to be important. And if you've got a player like Diego Costa, who in my opinion, when he's playing well, he is, people might dispute this with me, but I think he's the best striker in the league just because he just bothers defenders. He's a pain for them to play against. He scores goals out of nothing. He can lead the line on his own. I think he's a terrific player, and he will leave Chelsea. I think the damage has been done, but they've got so many competitions before Christmas. He's got to be involved somewhere, as long as he's fit.
Do you expect him Atletico Madrid in January?
Yes, I think when January comes and the ban is lifted, etc., I think you would fancy he'll go there, because I think there'll be a change then. Maybe Griezmann. I think the difficulty is Costa will definitely want to go to Atletico, and he knows that he'll play and he'll get a chance to prove himself for Spain ahead of the World Cup. But his problem might be that, say, Griezmann with the World Cup on the horizon, and it's so competitive in that France team, perhaps one of the most competitive positions in Europe, playing up front for the France team, is that he won't want to miss that opportunity, which, just to go off topic a bit, was one of the reasons why I think Thomas Lemar didn't move to Arsenal on deadline day is his worry that he knows with Monaco, who will be playing in the Champions League, he'll be competing for the title in Liga. The spotlight's on Liga because of Neymar and everything else. If he'd gone to Arsenal, who knows? They might have another poor season and he'd fall out of favour. So to bring it back to Costa, I think just because of what's on the horizon, he will try and play for Chelsea now, at least before Christmas.
Interesting you mentioned France there. Of course, they had a 0-0 draw last night with Luxembourg, and their attacking lineup included Giroud, Griezmann, Mbappe, Lemar, Pogba, all in that forward lineup, and couldn't score past Luxembourg. Absolutely incredible. Did you see any of that game, Seb?
I did see it. I think it's a case to say it's not about the names on the team sheet, it's how those names work in the system. And you looked at that and you thought, well, they've just tried to get as many attacking players on the pitch as possible. And sometimes it doesn't always work. And I heard Gareth Southgate say in the press conference yesterday, England press conference, that, against so-called weaker teams, even now, they can organise themselves defensively and you just have to be patient. And eventually, 9 times out of 10, you will break them down, be it late on. And that's one thing about the Malta game, which is what England managed to prove in the end. But France could do it. Just got to get that first goal and then they crumble. But they couldn't do it, could they?
No, they couldn't. It felt like the type of lineup I'd put on when I'm playing FIFA 17, try and get all the strikers in the team. I'm going to give my opinion on the fact or fiction there. I think it's fact. I think Costa will play again. I think mainly because you look at the example of someone like Carlos Tevez, who was in the absolute wilderness under Mancini at Manchester City, but still ended up playing. I think once he's back, once he's at training, once maybe him and Conte can have a cup of tea together, air their grievances, and he's too good a player to be toiling in the under-23s or sitting on the bench. I think it might take a little bit of time. Morata's certainly started pretty well to his career, but I'm not sure Conte really believes in Batshuayi. I don't think he's very keen on him. And unlike last year, where they only had to concentrate on the Premier League, they've got the Champions League as well. There'll be League Cup fixtures coming as well. So I think it's almost definite. We'll see Costa wearing that blue shirt again. There's only so much of time he can do jet skiing and playing in the circus in Brazil, I think. So that's going to leave us to our last question. Very similar to Costa. It is about another want-away player. It is about Philippe Coutinho. So we are going to say Liverpool should have let Coutinho join Barcelona. Fact or fiction?
Fiction. I'm saying fiction because I think what Liverpool have done by sticking it out is make a statement to say we're not going to be bullied by Barcelona. We know the money's there. We know everybody wants to play for Barcelona, and there's that fact that if Barcelona come calling, you want to play. But Liverpool are a big club. I know they've not won the Premier League for a long time, but they're a club with a lot of history, and they're a club that wants to say, we are one of the big boys in Europe, if not world football. So by saying that, we want to keep our players. And I don't think Coutinho is slightly different to the Sanchez situation, where Sanchez wanted to leave but didn't necessarily have a destination, which Coutinho didn't want to leave Liverpool. He signed a contract not that long ago, but it's just the fact he wanted to play for Barcelona. And the question now is, how do you fit Coutinho into a system when the last couple of games, Liverpool have looked pretty good going forward, and they don't look like they really need to add Coutinho to it. So it's a lovely problem for Klopp, and now he's added the Ox to it as well. So Liverpool have had a good summer. They've had a good start to the season. They look like they're going to score goals. They could score goals against anybody. And keeping Coutinho is just the feel-good factor around the club is very high at the moment. And that's what it's all about. The fans will be on board, and that buys you more time if you get the odd dodgy result. I think when you watch Liverpool play, you can see a lot of their players. I know there's been rumours about Chan and everything else, but a lot of their players look like they really want to play for the club. They've got attacking options off the bench. They've been able to loan out Origi, which shows that they trust in someone like Solanke. So it's looking really good for Liverpool at the moment. So from Coutinho's point of view, I think if he's patient, continues to play well, Barcelona will come back again for him next summer. He'll be able to go to the World Cup. I'd fancy he'll be in that Brazil squad. And then when Maybe, who knows, Iniesta might be his last season. Who knows? But you'd fancy that's the position where Coutinho would then be able to slot in and take over from him. Because you think now, if he joined them now, where would they have tried to fit him into the system? Because they bought Dembele. So is he going to be the man on the bench? It would have been interesting to see how Barca played it, really. So but going back to the original point, Liverpool were right to hold on to Coutinho, right to bat away the bids, even though I thought it was silly money as well. And I think they've won out of this scenario. And I think Coutinho will ultimately win. You'd fancy Barca will come back for him again.
Okay. Just want to mention something about Dembele there. Did you see his presentation? Did you see his kick-up, Seb?
Look, I'm gonna defer. It is funny to watch. It is funny to watch. You expect them to do it, but I have to say, I know some people who can do amazing kick-ups, but you put them on an 11-a-side pitch and they're ineffective. So it's about what he does on the pitch, not his kick-ups. But it is funny to watch. Whenever I see it, it is quite funny, and it's happened more than once, hasn't it, Paulinho?
Yeah, it was like watching me do kick-ups, and I was thinking, oh, if he's going for 138 million. And I think that brings me to my point of fact with Coutinho. I'm going to slightly, I agree with all of your points, by the way, but I'm just going to say fact towards that I felt that Liverpool should have let Coutinho go. I think they made some really good signings this summer. I think we'll wait and see how Ox does, but Salah looks really good against Arsenal in particular. This is a team at the moment which is without Lallana at the moment, and it's got Sturridge coming off the bench and Solanke, as you mentioned. I think there's lots of options there, and they've been coping without him. Don't forget Woodburn. Woodburn as well, with an absolutely cracking goal for Wales over the weekend. I think Barca will go back in for Coutinho, but I don't expect them to go in with quite as much money, because at the moment it almost feels like they had money to burn from the Neymar deal. And I think a year down the line they'll go, oh, we've spent a bit of money there, we've spent a bit of money here. And I think they might be hoping that the pressure Coutinho might have on them. And it could be a bit of that Luis Suarez thing where Liverpool said to Suarez, look, stay with us one more year. Let's try and win the title together. And then if not, you can go. I'm not necessarily sure they've said that to Coutinho, but I think Barcelona might be thinking that they would have done that. And so this time next year, or well, actually July next year, they'll come in with perhaps a slightly lower offer. So I think perhaps they should have let them go. But I completely agree with you. I think it's a really strong statement from Liverpool to keep him, and I think it really shows that they want to win the Premier League and do pretty well in the Champions League. And I think at the moment they've got a squad to make an impact in both of them. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. Well, Seb, it's been really good to talk to you on today's Fact or Fiction. Why don't you let us know where we can continue to follow you online, on Twitter, and also anything else that you're up to at the moment, please?
I'll just have a little add on this month. I've got 3 commentary games in Serie A, and I'll obviously tweet those when they come up. So it's a great league, and I love working on it, as I do all the leagues in Europe that I work on, Bundesliga and Liga as well, and possibly coming up the Champions League on BT Sport. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. I've always got a little bit of a soft spot for Milan. Seb, have you watched much of them? Of course, they made a lot of signings over the summer. Have they started to gel at all?
They're getting there. I think it's been a wonderful summer for Milan. I think people had forgotten about them in many ways. They just weren't, they weren't on the scene, and Juventus have stolen a lot of their thunder. But you forget they're one of the most successful clubs in Europe. And they've just, on the sly, with the money they've now got, they've picked up some good signings, some good young players as well. And so, I can't say keep an eye on them, because I think everybody's aware that they need to keep an eye on them. But, we're looking for big things from Milan. It's such early days in the moment, but I think they'll have a good season.
Will the Rossoneri be back? Well, Seb, it's been really good to speak to you. That Twitter one more time, at Seb_Hutch.
Indeed.
Well, if you're not following already, get on it, because as you've seen on today's programme, this man is full of great sports knowledge. Seb Hutchinson, European football commentator, thank you for being on Fact or Fiction.
Thank you very much, Richard. Cheers.
Really good to speak to Seb on today's Fact or Fiction. If you've liked this programme, please put it in the comment section below. Give us a like, share it with your friends. and tell them about our program. We are live every Monday at 11 British Standard Time. We would love to hear from you. We'll be back next Monday as we digest more of the big stories of sport. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful week. Goodbye.